a very exciting panel discussion today on a topic that I think is very top of mind, both for builders and for investors as well. And that is, how does applied AI turn industries into innovation engines? I'm going to just briefly introduce my co-panelists with me. We have Bratin Saha, Chief Product Officer and Chief Technical Officer at DigitalOcean. We have Lisa Dolan, Managing Director at Link Ventures. And we have Philip Rothel, CTO of Neo4j. And to just set the context, applied AI has really created a monumental change for vertical software. It's really shifted vertical software from sleepy SaaS to one of the most exciting categories to build a company and invest in during the last 24 months. And I think the sentiment is that industry-specific vertical AI is the new horizontal. So we're gonna, to start off, talk to our panelists here on kind of why now and what has really changed in industries like healthcare, legal, construction, home services, that really make these particular sectors fertile grounds for applied AI. Maybe Lisa, we can talk with you just from the investor lens to kick us off.
So Lisa Dolan, Managing Director with Link Ventures. Most of my portfolio are vertical applications of AI across employment. I was an early investor in Mercor, AI recruiting, and then applications to healthcare. And now we're seeing tons of applications to home services and blue-collared work. Initially, most of my portfolio has been in white-collared. I would say the why now, there's been several articles, the MIT article that probably most of you have read, and then also the Apollo article that came out sharing that there's tons of personal use of AI, but it hasn't had enterprise adoption. And that is, we all can sort of have our own hypotheses around why that is, but the enterprise has both horizontal and vertical applications, whereas when it's just your own self and it's a consumer application, a prosumer application, you're able to train it end to end. And so what I am starting to see now is prosumer adoption of a full end-to-end workflow. But the enterprise is still hard to adopt because you have to go from different verticals across the enterprise. So what I'm really interested in is that end-to-end workflow adoption and training an agent similar to how you would train a junior employee. So we have some seniors in the room. If you remember when you were training your junior employee, you would not allow them to get to the next level until they aced the low-level work. And so when I'm actually, I now write our LP letters with ChatGPT and use ChatGPT a ton. But what we need to do is actually train in the enterprise, train our agents similar to how we would train a low-level employee, and then the enterprise will get the trust, and then the enterprise will really be able to roll it out in different verticals. But that's what I'm seeing as the missing link in enterprise is there's still this sense of, okay, I can't really give it my autonomy because it hasn't aced the low-level problems. So I'll stop there, but offline I can share sort of my thoughts on Mercor, my thoughts on Anomaly, which is AI for healthcare, AI for media, and AI for tech.
That's great. And Bratin, you have hundreds of thousands of customers on the DigitalOcean platform. What kind of trends are you seeing, and why is kind of vertical AI really exploding?
So I'll say a couple of things. I agree with what Lisa said. I'll say a couple of things come up. First is this is really the first time with generative AI and LLMs that you can really automate knowledge work. Being able to take information, being able to analyze it, act on it, and do something. So it's really the first time that we have been able to do that. And if you think about all of these domains, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's legal, it was about knowledge work. And so part of the why now question is now, and these are expensive domains where the average cost of the employee or of the knowledge work is quite high. So if you can automate some of it, the ROI is there. And so part of the why now is these are domains that are primarily composed of knowledge workers. This is the first time that we really have the technology that can automate some kind of knowledge work, taking in some data insights, giving recommendations, and so on. The other thing that I'll also say is that a lot of these domains are what I call error-resilient domains, or error-resilient workflows. So think of it as the legal domain. A paralegal is writing a draft of filing. They're really writing a draft that's then going to get edited a lot of times. What that means is even if the first draft is not perfect, that's okay, because the whole workflow is about you give me a draft that's not perfect and I keep making it better. The same with finance. Let's say you think of an investment analyst or banking analyst or something. They're creating some reports that then get edited on, worked on, and so on. And what that means is that the first version of what is being produced doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. In fact, there is no expectation that the first version of it is perfect, because it is going to get perfected over time. And now when you think of LLMs and AI, they are probabilistic, right? They make errors. So when you go into a workflow that is error resilient and is actually built, and we humans expect it to not be perfect, then the match gets to be really good. And so that is what, when we look at our customers, a lot of them are going into some of these things. Like, we recently launched a platform, and there have been like tens of thousands doing a lot of this work. So people are excited about the fact that there is potential ROI in automating knowledge work, are excited about the fact that there seems to be an opportunity to automate knowledge work, and are excited about the fact that these workflows are inherently error resilient, so are a somewhat good match.
Then turning it to Philip, in terms of training these applications and scaling them, what does it take from a data infrastructure, model infrastructure, investment to really, scale out these applications and workflows?
So vertical AI is really appealing because, particularly if you're a startup founder, because that's where most of the economic activity happens. And I agree, there's irresilient workflows in terms of just day-to-day processes, and there's a lot of cost savings opportunity there. But where the real money is and where the real value is in core domains, core applications, where the stakes are high. So by definition, when the stakes are high, the stakes of the quality of a good answer is very valuable, and the impact of a bad answer can be quite detrimental if you look at everything from brand and reputational impact to regulatory fines to health and human safety, data privacy, and so on. And if so these new technologies that are all very promising, when you try to apply them to anything that's higher stakes, you end up with I think a large part of this 95% number comes out of that, is that, the success that we're seeing with just models tends to be in these low, more error resilient kinds of use cases. So what I've seen and where we've been coming at it is, I just spent the last few weeks doing the rounds at customer conferences where we had everyone from Adobe to AppV to Walmart to Uber and so on, talking about AI success for higher stakes use cases. And what differentiates the ability to take these on is to not just use the models as a source of either data or reasoning. And the finding is that for higher stakes use cases, you end up needing knowledge to drive explainability, accuracy, and respecting data privacy and security rules, so governance. And so from a data infrastructure, getting back to your question, having a high quality knowledge system, which in my world, that's a knowledge graph that can contain either the domain information relative to the application that's being solved, or in larger cases, like if we're talking about AI disrupting SaaS. One great example of AI disrupting SaaS is probably the most heralded one has been Klarna retiring 1,200 SaaS apps, which actually they did with a knowledge graph where they had a cursor application on top. So that same risk of being replaced if you're a SaaS founder exists if you're an AI founder as well, from the perspective that if all you have is something that's a layer on top of an LLM, much like many SaaS apps are just a layer to read and write data that fundamentally sits in some vendor's SaaS database, then that's not going to be enough to differentiate.
And as vertical AI automates a lot of these workflows, you're not just automating tasks, right? You're also augmenting, and in some cases, replacing labor and manual systems, thereby expanding revenue per customer, gross margin, and effectively also the total addressable market for an industry, right? And this is leading to a lot of innovation that we're seeing in how software companies price and their pricing models. So how are you guys seeing vertical AI companies price their offerings today to capture this additional value creation of applied AI? And are you seeing any type of pushback from the market or customers?
I can talk a little bit about our experience. So to your first point, this is indeed a really good opportunity for expanding your addressable market or upsell and cross-sell. And I'll give one example of how we are leveraging that, and that lead to the pricing point. So we have a web hosting software called Cloudways, and currently what you have is a lot of e-commerce sites and agents host their website on it. Now, one of the pain points is, and this is a WordPress hosting, one of the pain points is if the site goes down, then they have to call up customer support or spend an hour really debugging it. And it turns out when you look at our customers, on average, something happens about once a week. So today, it's a call to the customer support agent. And we get about 600,000 calls every year for this. Now, to your point, Shri, with agents, we just launched it. With agents, we are now able to root cause these in many cases and actually offer suggestions for fixing. So now it has actually increased the TAMs, the addressable market, from I'm not just hosting it, but I'm actually also helping reduce some of the maintenance work that you have to do, right? And so when we went in and then, looked at, well, you don't really want to do kind of a cost plus thing because you're probably leaving too much value on the table. It's hard to do like a competitive assessment because you don't have similar kind of products. So we invariably kind of tend to get to the value based. Okay, you're spending 1 hour a week. How much does that translate into dollars and so on and so forth. I think what we are seeing is when we started this, we thought, okay, maybe people will not really go with this value-based thing, but we haven't seen that kind of a pushback yet. There's a lot of convincing you have to do because you have to say, was I really spending an hour? If I don't have them spending an hour fixing this, would they really be able to do something else or would they be not? So it gets a little hard to convince initially that, look, the time that I'm saving you is going to translate into real productivity enhancements and economic value. But once that happens, I think we have seen customers be a lot more willing to do that. But on the back end, what we have also seen is it's very hard to predict usage. And you can often end up in situations where you say, hey, the average usage per customer is going to be X tokens. And you may end up with wild swings, 2X, 10X, 5X. And that makes it harder to really figure out the economics of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time, and with startups is they can't predict the demand of their cloud compute costs. So I would actually tell you that a lot of the companies I see are still identifying what their pricing strategy will be. So of course, yes, seat-based pricing is what a lot of them are starting with, but they want to get to volume throughput, right? Volume throughput. So Mercor is a business model based on matches. I'm looking for companies that are native AI companies and are actually, what is it? What is Mercor? It's a recruiter, right? I just met with a company yesterday that is a native AI supply chain company. It is YC. They're actually acquiring distributors. So they're going to be a native AI distribution company. And so those companies, and this native AI distribution company, what's his KPI? It's actually not revenue. It's throughput, volume of throughput. And so I would say that, one, I'm still seeing this progression from seat-based pricing to throughput. And the native AI companies, the ones that are not just the B2B applications selling into businesses, are thinking about throughput and owning their customer. And so with a company like Mercor that has 30% plus, gross margins, they own their customer, they own their margin. And I would say we see most companies that may just be a wrapper and are ultimately giving a lot of their lunch to Claude. And so looking for really those companies that own the customer, and that means owning the workflow and then the learning process, right? So they're constantly iterating on their model and self-learning over time, but you need to own that own customer to be able to do that effectively.
Philip, how about you? What types of kind of pricing innovation are affecting your business and your end customers?
Yeah, so ultimately one needs to choose, are you horizontal or are you vertical? The beauty about going vertical is that while you've narrowed your TAM, by definition, by solving a particular problem, the higher you are in the stack, the closer you are to the end customer, the more you're perceived to be generating the bulk of the value, and the more you can get people to buy into new kinds of value-based pricing models, even though it's still hard. I don't think anyone's really cracked this well. I've seen some consultancies do this. I guess that's horizontal, but then they're building the specific application, and that's in the negotiation. Speaking for myself, we're rigorously horizontal, and kind of the trade-off is I've seen many cases where their customers literally getting hundreds of millions of dollars of value attributed primarily to our platform, and we're getting 2 orders of magnitude less than that. But I'm very happy with that, because by being horizontal, the other side of it is you have a much larger TAM.
If I may add one other thing, to Lisa's point, and your point as well, we ultimately had to get to a point where beyond a certain stage, you have to make it usage-based to make the economics work. And then you run into the other side, to your question about what is the pushback. Then you get to the other side of the pricing model is no longer simple. And then our customers come in and say, look, if I want to use this, I need to have some predictability. I need to have some idea of how much this is going to cost, right? So we started off with, let's make it simple and predictable because we want to drive adoption. This is still early days. And you then get into these, whether it's per seat, per month, per whatever, they try to make it simple. And then you see, well, it's kind of getting tough. I need to get into some usage base. And then you run into, well, I'm not going to use it that much because I don't know how much it's going to cost. So, it kind of goes back to the point that it's still early days. It's still early days and some of this is being figured out.
And I've just one more comment, maybe to state the obvious, because we've been talking about how seat-based models are problematic. The obvious answer is that you don't know how many human beings are going to be at the other end of that job in a few years. And to the degree that there are agents, I've already seen some of the larger companies charge on a per agent, like treating an AI agent as a human seat. and buyers really don't like that. And you can get into all kinds of definitional ambiguity. So it's just not a sustainable model in the long term.
Agree, yeah.
And when you have a lot of these vertical software applications automating tasks on behalf of people, you would think that some of the traditional systems of record, whether it's a CRM, a LMS, ERP, some of the value here may diminish, right, over time. So should, vertical AI aim to replace some of these core systems of record up front, or live more as an execution layer, on top of them, collecting new data that comes from these agentic workflows? Can I start?
Yeah. I do think that these systems will, in the near term, be augmented, in the medium to longer term, replaced. Not necessarily by more vertical silos, because one of the things that we've seen is, to the degree that AI is fuel for everything that a company does, you, as a CEO of the company, you want your AI to make decisions based on the totality of all the data in the company. And if you're just building in a way that you're replacing like for like different silos, then you may have a better point solution, but it's going to be to the detriment of the larger organization. So what my advice to SaaS builders is, if you're taking on a problem that probably will only require some subset of data, having the right APIs and having part of your value prop be, I'm not locking the data in, that data becomes available to the rest of the organization to participate in a larger, more holistic AI platform. And then I guess when I look at augmenting as an answer, this is where, again, to solve AI problems that look beyond the scope of a certain silo, you need to find a technique for doing it. So enterprise knowledge graphs is one, there are others, but that's something to look at. And I don't believe that models are the right answer, because you need a database for it. So for that, you need to examine both the scope of each of your existing ERP, CRM, SaaS applications, and then divide it up into what's the data store part of it and what's the functionality part of it, and then look at an architecture that separates those two concerns and decides what to do with each.
I would add, I agree with what Philip was saying. I would add kind of a couple of things to it. One is, as Philip was saying, you want your data and your models to always get fresh data, right? And not just be using the stuff that you've pre-trained with. And if you're trying to get fresh stuff, that gets stored somewhere, and that probably is a system of record where it gets stored, to your point about augmentation. The other thing is the efficiency of it. Like, sure, you could, put all of that inside a model, but what is the cost of retrieving that through a query versus the cost of retrieving that from a system of record that has really been built just for that thing? So, I actually haven't seen that data, and might be interesting to do that, is what is the cost of getting a piece of information from a model through a query in terms of compute cost, power cost, and so on, versus what's the cost of that similar information getting it out from a database. And I would imagine that database would be probably, or a system of record would probably be much cheaper getting the whole thing, because it's just been optimized just to get that out. And then when you look at a future where this becomes pretty pervasive, then all of these efficiency considerations get pretty important. So, it's a long way of answering. At least in the near term, I don't see the system of records completely going away and all of it getting subsumed inside a model.
Yeah, I would add, I agree with both. Maybe I'll share some pinpointed examples. I see companies that are applying LLMs to ERPs, to CRMs, and those are not the real bullish companies. The bullish companies are saying, and just recently I spoke to a founder who is building a LLM for clinicians, right? And are they going to be trying to have the Holy Grail? The Holy Grail is to build an integration with Epic. But if you're building an integration with Epic, the AI does not store, or Epic is storing data in a different way than the capabilities that AI has. So I invest in a company called Payzen. Payzen is BNPL for hospital expenses, doing quite well. And where I see an opportunity with LLMs is to deal with that. Everyone has dealt with that problem of copay and the claims process. But each system of record currently is a siloed data storage. And so with AI, and the big unlock is to combine these siloed pieces of data. And so, yes, it's a fast go-to-market to build within the existing CRMs, the existing ERPs, the existing claims management systems, but ultimately they're all siloed. And so the big ambitious founders, also capital intensive, are looking to actually not integrate with the existing CRMs, the existing ERPs.
And do you think by chance that some of the data being collected through these more agentic workflows over time, this creates a new system of record?
Yes. Yeah, and that's ultimately the vision. But I do think we need to walk before we run. And so there is now a process, and it's challenging for founders to deal with, okay, yes, I can be venture funded, but ultimately I do need to make money today. And so what is that path ultimately to have their own system of record?
Right. How are we on time?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. Well, last question, and then we can kind of turn it to the audience. How are you kind of thinking about applied AI and AI systems in terms of them being viewed more as a teammate rather than a tool, within an organization? And once you let AI take over part of a workflow, what does that mean for the org structure of your companies and different roles, as well?
I can start. I think it's going to be a continuum. You start with being a tool, you start with being a really, really good tool, and then slowly you become more of a teammate. Because I think there's a trust factor involved in what kind of tasks you delegate, and what kind of answers you get, and so on and so forth. And I guess what happens, but we are going to get there. I think it's a continuum. You start at one point, and then you delegate more and more, and you're working more and more closely, and ultimately you get to a point where some real tasks are being handed over, and then it's a real teammate. And then in terms of the org structure, you probably end up often in a situation where a person is also managing a lot of agents. I saw this other article about compute per employee, which is, how much compute is each employee using to get the job done, which, is another way of saying how many agents are being used to get the job done. And I expect that to keep growing up. And so, that's probably where we end up.